Andrew, thank you very much. A good list of things that obviously one can do in your particular building. And we'll have some questions if you'd like to think of questions at the end, so we have an opportunity to ask the panel. Now I'd like to introduce, if I may, Julian Feasby. Julian is the Internal Environment Management, and he's the head of the Internal Environment Management for the Environment Agency. So very much in the limelight, because obviously they're the gatekeepers, shall we say, of the CRC. But his dual responsibility, because he also, in spite of all the rules and all the collection of data that goes on, he has also to adhere to all the requirements. So he's got a dual responsibility of being able to make sure he can make his estate efficient. So please carry on, Julian. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I cheated a little. I have some slides today, which are going to pop up in a second. Here we go. If you can go to the next slide. I can't control them from here. So I want to give you a little bit of background about the Environment Agency for those that aren't aware. I'm very aware that the Environment Agency has two roles which are mentioned a lot here today. One which is, yes, we are the regulator for the carbon reduction commitment for CRC. I almost feel like I have to come out like an alcoholic and say that at the start of my presentation. But I suffer from being a participant in it as well. So all of those stories we hear about, having to understand all the rules, that applies to us also. As far as what are we as an organisation, well, this defines us a little bit. So we are an environmental regulator, fundamentally. We are that old, we are that large. We're about 12,000 people in our organisation, so we're pretty big. We have about 300 sites. Curiously for us, you'd have thought, wouldn't you, that doing environmental improvement is dead easy because we're the Environment Agency. Boy, I wish it was that easy. We're full of scientists who have 1,000 accurate reasons why you shouldn't be doing stuff, and will argue in great detail about why you're wrong. So actually changing behaviours in the Environment Agency I found much more tricky. When your chief exec says do this and 50 people say why that's the wrong decision and give chapter and verse why, it's a challenging challenge. Anyway, that's the background. If we can do the next slide, please. Just a bit of wider context about the general environmental impacts that we cause. We're a pretty big company. Yeah, we have energy use in our buildings and what have you. We'll come on to that. There's all the other types of environmental issues that, in my role, I help us to coordinate to make sure we're not so bad as we could be. We do a lot of construction work as well in our organisation, hence we actually have the potential to cause quite a lot of damage to riverbanks and to the areas where we work. So we have to be very careful that we don't do that and plan our work accordingly. We have some peculiar social and ethical challenges as well environmentally. What do you do when people, when their religion is to burn their dead and throw the ashes in a river? It's a common problem. Is that pollution? Do we prosecute people for doing that? So we have some curious environmental and ethical challenges as well to overcome. Moving on, next slide please. There we go. I thought I'd launch straight in with our carbon footprint, which goes on to energy efficiency, of course. So here you go. This is our carbon footprint for a year or so ago. Around about. I mean, we can't get too anal about being accurate here, can you, on carbon? It's about 57,000 tonnes for us, made up like this. Now, the one we'll talk about more, buildings electricity, landlords electricity, you can imagine what that is. That's a building using power. The ones over there, least casual and badge, that's our fleet. So we include our fleet, and we do an awful lot of miles driving around to regulate you guys, I suppose. And we've got some very hard targets, so we're reducing by our mileage by around about a quarter over the next 5 years. We've reduced by 10 million miles a year already in the last 2 years. So we've had some really good success on just being cleverer about how we take our trips. The big stinker for us is this big blue one up here. There it is, pumping electricity. So if it rains a lot and your house is at risk of flooding, we have to pump enormous amounts of water away from you to protect you from flooding. That's one of our roles as a regulator. That uses phenomenal amounts of electricity, as you can imagine. Problem is, when it's really dry as well, and it hasn't been raining, we have to pump loads and loads of water back in to cities to make sure there's enough supply for the water companies to give you. So we're kind of caught between a rock and a hard place. We have to pump a lot when it's dry and pump a lot when it's wet, and it takes up that proportion of our carbon footprint. And this is in our CRC footprint as well. So we have to make some very tricky decisions. Do we stop pumping and put you at risk, your supply and your flooding, your properties? We can clearly get smarter about how we pump. We haven't yet been able to put any voltage optimization equipment on our pumping stations yet. We'd like to, but it's proving rather tricky. We're putting about 40 into our buildings, but our pumping stations are a rather trickier option. So any organisations out there that are geniuses on how to make pumping far more efficient, we're out there looking. If we could move on to the next slide, please. here we go. So we've done quite well so far. These are not just energy efficiency, these are some of the other measures we here. I've mentioned mileage already. We've reduced 15%. That's around about, like I say, 10 million miles or so per year we've reduced by. Energy so far, after 2 years, this was about a year ago, was only down to 5%, 4.9% reduction. And there's a story to tell there, which I'll come on to in a little while. But you know, so far, so good. But that's all the easy wins, I suppose. That's doing all the stuff that we've heard about lots. And I could reel off lists of things we've done, but you've kind of heard them all before. And it's a case of how do you actually make them happen? I'll come on to it. Next slide, please. This is energy. So this is the one that we're talking about here, energy efficiency, and how do you make yourself more efficient. The story this graph tells is, the reason it's amber, by the way, is we slightly failed our target this year, just by 1%. We started really in earnest 2005-06, our baseline year. This is buildings electricity. And even though we're the agency, even though we're terribly environmental, it takes time to get these initiatives to work. You can turn your lights off, and Earth Hour proves that turning your lights off saves quite a bit of energy, of course. But it takes time to do your initiatives, to do your comms, to get your business really bought into it. What we start to see this year, 2009-10, is we've seen a good old jump down in the building energy use that we've seen. And this is despite having one of the coldest winters, of course, that we've seen for 30 years. We've had to have our heating on as well, but we've managed to keep it down. So what we're seeing here is, and we've seen this in other organisations we've helped, is you have to be persistent. And this is why the CRC is a good scheme as far as it's encouraging that longer term view. Don't expect your carbon measures, your carbon and energy use to come down quickly. It takes a bit of time. If we can do the next slide, please. I'll do my little list of things that might help, but from a slightly different point of view. Here we go. Relentless communications is part of it, and not just putting out posters. That's part of it. You've got to do everything you can think of, because people don't get the message in the same way, of course. So whether it's messages on pay slips, presentations, slides, posters, goodness knows what, do it all the time. You have campaigns. You can read this as quickly as I can say it. I draw your attention towards our carbon reduction fund. We're not an organisation that believes in carbon offsetting. You may, that's great. What we do instead, we take the amount of money we could have spent on offsetting our carbon footprint, and we take that money internally and we say, right, well, we'll spend this and we'll give it to people internally to spend on projects which can be used to save energy. That wind turbine there, it's only a little one up at Draycott, that was funded by this fund. We gave it to some local staff, said, find a turbine, put it up, you want to do that, make it work. And what you find in these buildings where you do these things is it changes behaviours in itself. People turn off monitors when there's a wind turbine on the roof, curiously. So this is why we don't offset our business. We spend that money internally on projects like wind turbines, biomass boilers, and the like. These bottom two here, I implore you to do. You can get as many audits done as you like of your buildings, and you can install kit and change behaviours. That's great. You know what? Get an electrician in. We've got plenty of examples in our organisation where you find the local sparky, you get them to walk around the building with you, and they will point stuff out that you would never spot. Whether it's a timer on that vending machine, or turn that off on a weekend, or you've got 10 lights there, why don't you just take 4 of the tubes out, it'll be fine. And they spot stupid things like that that you'll never think to do, and they're generally cheaper because the sparky said it, and he won't charge you an auditor's fee for doing it either. And then finally, behavioural change. Oh gosh, there's 1,000 different ways of looking at behavioural change. It doesn't have to be too complicated. My experience in businesses, find the local loudmouth, get them to own that department's energy reduction, and boy, they'll make it happen. If you tell them what the energy use was yesterday and you want to make it lower today, they'll badger their colleagues until it happens. Don't forget, it works. It really does. Peer pressure can be very powerful, of course. Next slide, please. Nearly finished here. So this is really just a reminder that you can train a dog quite easily to do this sort of thing. You say, turn off the light enough times and it will do it. Thank you. My kids, I've got 3 young kids. I can't persuade them to turn the damn lights off. But you know how you do it? You keep saying it over and over and over again, and eventually they work out how to do it. They'll stand on a chair to turn the lights off, and they'll remember to do it. And they'll be proud when they remember to do it without you asking. Yeah, well, you know, we're adults. We're not that different. You've got to be relentless about doing it. One way of doing it, onto the next slide. These are our directors. These are the senior directors and chief exec of the Environment Agency. We get them involved. We went through the bins. We got them out of one of their board meetings, and they went through the bins, and they had to hold up how much of the stuff in the bins was in the wrong bin. They do the same with electricity audits. They go around the building, putting balloons on people's desks if they've left their lights on and their monitors overnight. Without your directors doing things, it's a harder message to give. It certainly helps us. And finally, here we go. We have some other schemes we're doing as well. Energy efficiency is good. We have our renewables. We have a scheme to put in wind turbines in a lot of our land if we can. This is part of the story. But the basics of my message on the final slide, thank you, is this, and it's this final little phrase here, which is, this is what the CRC is trying to do as well. For those of you in organisations that haven't started, don't try doing too much. Pick 5 things and do 5 things, and then pick 5 more things and do them. Don't try and do too many things at once, and try and make it very plain and simple what you want people to do. I shall stop there. Thank you very much.